Hello and welcome to the Hand of Pod, a football nostalgia show brought to you by Sterling Sports. Each episode we bring you fascinating stories about legendary players in our countdown of the top 100 greatest players of all time. Follow the show to find out who will be crowned number one. So, welcome to the Hand of Pod European Championships special. I'm joined by Matt and Gilbert. Pardon?
Hello.
Part one.
Part one, yes. Yes, European Championship special, the history of the Euros, part one. We've split it up. There's three of us today, and we'll both be kind of taking the helm of going through the first three editions of the tournament. And I'm going to start by giving you a little brief kind of history of where it came from. Now, the European Championships, or as we kind of know them, the Euros, are the third biggest sporting event in the world. But it took a long time for the Euros to get there. British teams that have actually played in what was called the Home Championships from 1883. And this was their biggest kind of international tournament until they entered the World Cup in 1950. Since then, the Home Championship was then used as qualification for the World Cup and later actually as qualification for the Euros. The Central European International Cup was played from 1927 until the first Euros in 1960. The participating nations in this were Italy, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Switzerland, Poland, Romania, and Yugoslavia. And like I said, this went all the way up to the introduction of the Euros. And it was actually in 1927 that the secretary of the French Football Federation, Mr. Henri Delaunay, had proposed the idea of a European football tournament. Now, he was also part of the creation of the World Cup, but he really fought hard for a European competition all the way back from 1927. And he actually died in 1955. But a story about him actually was he was a ref before he became part of the football federations. And he got hit. He was blowing the whistle for full time in a match, and he got hit in the face with the football, lost 2 teeth, and swallowed the whistle. And
worse. That's a bad day at the office.
I thought you were going to tell me that that's how he died.
No, that's not how he died. Yeah,
every time he spoke after.
yeah. And he decided to quit reffing from that point. Never reffed again, and started. That's how he kind of became part of the Football Federation, staying in the sport, because he also worked for FIFA and then what became UEFA.
I like the thought that that it was a disgruntled player.
Yes.
He'd just given a yellow card to
booted the ball at him
because he must have had the whistle in his mouth at the time.
Yeah. Or maybe he was one of those refs that constantly runs around with the whistle in it. You don't see refs doing that anymore, but I remember refs that they just had the whistle in their mouth,
just ready to blow.
So either it was per smack, or just happened to have it in his mouth the whole time.
But yeah, so
I'd love to see footage of that.
Yeah, I haven't seen the footage. I'd really like to. But he died in 1955, so never got to see the inception of the Euros. And his son Pierre actually took over his role, and the trophy was named after him, the Henri Delaunay Trophy, which is still the trophy to this day. Now, when it was conceived in 1960, it was called the European Nations Cup. It wasn't until 1969 that it was renamed the European Championships. So the first 3 editions of the tournament we're talking about today were the European Nations Cup. Now, there were some big name teams that didn't actually enter the first tournament because they were quite against its creation. These included West Germany, Sweden, Italy, Netherlands, and all the British teams. And these are some big nations at the time. West Germany and Italy were kind of already giants of the game. Italy having already won a couple of World Cups, and Sweden were in the final.
Who'd won the World Cup in '58 before?
58 was Brazil.
Pelé.
They beat Sweden in the final.
5-2.
Yeah. Remember it well, Torbs. And and obviously Sweden weren't there, and then all the British teams. And this is much like the beginning of the World Cup. Actually, the British teams.
I was just going to say the World Cup was like that
in 1950, and it seems like this kind of English FA attitude of we're almost too good for that. We don't need to enter these tournaments. And the strange thing was they probably were one of the best teams at that point. Especially at the early stages of the World Cup, and then in the 1950s, we had some of the best players in the world, and we weren't playing in these tournaments. We were just playing in our own tournament, which we considered better. Now, entry to the tournament cost 200 Swiss francs, which won't get you very. Having been to Switzerland, that won't get you very far. And it was a straight knockout, with rounds being played home and away right up until the kind of main part of the tournament, which was just a 4-team tournament starting at the semi-finals. Now 17 teams entered the tournament, and they actually said they needed 16 to make it go ahead. At one point they dropped to 15, so they weren't sure, and then it ended up at 17, which meant there was a playoff before the tournament even started between Czechoslovakia and Republic of Ireland, which was a 2-legged playoff, and the Czechs won 4-2 over the 2 legs. But the first kind of official match in the Euros was a match between the Soviet Union and Hungary, with a 3-1 win to the Soviets. And that was actually in September 1958, 2 years before the tournament took place. So all these qualifying rounds of matches were over the course of the 2 years prior to the tournament. Now, so the round of 16 was kind of the first qualifying round, and then the quarterfinals were played to gain entry into the finals, which were to be played in the summer of 1960. And there was a very interesting point in the quarterfinals where Spain were drawn against the Soviet Union, and General Franco was the dictator of Spain. Now, I know you're our kind of political correspondent, Matt. But you might have researched General Franco and his role in the 1964 edition when we come on to that. But he actually refused to let the Soviet Unions play in Spain, and said he didn't want that happening. And it was almost a case of like he saw it as there was more to lose than to gain as to hold the match, with it being kind of the communist Russians. And there was also a point that there were still a lot of prisoners of war, Spanish prisoners of war, being held captive in Russia at that time from the Second World War. So he didn't want to play a team where Spanish civilians were being held captive, didn't want to have the Russian national anthem being played at the Bernabeu. So they said they refused to play them at home and refused to go there, and suggested a neutral ground, but it was rejected by UEFA, and they were banned from the tournament. And Spain would have probably been favourites They had Madrid were kind of the best team in the world at that point, and there were 7 players from Madrid in the Spanish team, and this included Alfredo Di Stefano and Feneric Puskas, who later didn't play for Spain.
Was in the Spanish team.
But at that point, they were both in the Spanish team.
I never knew that
and
he played for
most
Spain.
People would have thought, yeah, playing for Spain at that point. Yeah. And yeah, so I know Di Stefano went on to play for Argentina, but at that point they were playing for Spain, and it was basically most of the Madrid team who were the best team in the world, winning the European Cups. So you would have, like, everyone would have thought that Spain would have definitely beaten the Soviet Union at that point and probably gone on to win the whole thing, but General Franco said no. Now, the host country for the tournament was actually decided after the 4 finalists has been decided, after the quarterfinals were all played, so they knew who it was, and it would be one of them. And it was decided to be held in France. And the 4 teams going to the finals were France, Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, and Czechoslovakia. Now, the first semi-final was France v Yugoslavia, and there are actually 2 great teams of the era. France were 3rd place in the World Cup 2 years earlier, 1958, with Just Fontaine scoring a record 13 goals in just 6 games in that World Cup. And he actually scored 5 in the qualifying stages of this tournament. And Yugoslavia were knocked out in the quarterfinals of the previous World Cup, and they'd go on to reach the semi-finals in 1962. Now, the game ended 5-4 to Yugoslavia, and this is a record of the highest scoring game in any Euros to date. And it was the first game in the finals, which is incredible, really. But I guess we don't see a lot in the Euros of those big drubbings of teams that you often see in the World Cup, because there's less kind of minnows playing, isn't there? Well, yeah, but even recently, you would have thought we would have been beaten in more recent days of like a big scoring game, because quite often you've seen like Brazil beat North Korea 10-0 and stuff in World Cups, but because there's been less teams traditionally in the Euros up until recent editions, that you don't really have many underdogs playing. Yeah, so that game 5-4, and the other semi-final was the Soviet Union beat Czechoslovakia 3-0, and the Soviet Union had won gold at the Olympics in 1956, and they actually played in their first World Cup in 1958, where they knocked out England in a group stage playoff before eventually losing to runners-up Sweden in the quarterfinals. Now, Russia beat Yugoslavia. Russia went on to play Yugoslavia in the final, which they won 2-1 after extra time. Now, the winning goal scorer, I've tried to say his name, but I'll give it another go. It's Victor Ponedelnik. He scored the winner in extra time, with Lev Yashin playing in goal for the Soviets, and apparently he made a string of saves in normal time to keep Russia in it, and then they went on to get that goal. And the ref for the game, I know we're talking about refs a lot tonight, was one Arthur Ellis, who was English, and he was linesman in the 1950 World Cup, and he was later the ref on It's a Knockout in the 1970s. Now, overall, in the 4 matches, there were 17 goals, which at 4.25 is the highest goals per game in any of the tournaments to date. And Victor Ponedelnik's surname actually means Monday in Russian, and the final, held on a Sunday, didn't finish until just after midnight. So it was it was quite the winner for all the headline writers of the day. But yeah, so that was the 1960 tournament, and Matt, you've been having a look at 1964.
1964 followed a similar format to what they'd done in 1960. So it was preliminary rounds leading to a finals, which was a 4-team semi-final knockout tournament, and the preliminary rounds were all home and away 2-legged knockouts. By this time, the 60 championship was considered quite a success. So where there'd only been 17 teams register, or 17 countries register for 60, by now there were 29 countries that registered. There were only 4 countries that didn't, and that was West Germany, Scotland, Finland, and Cyprus. So West Germany and Scotland were still out.
Yeah.
East Germany were in it though. But so now England were in it, Italy were in it, all those other. So it was a much more representative, for the most part, of the strongest teams now in Europe.
Yeah.
The first match of the whole thing, so the preliminaries, was Norway versus Sweden.
Oh, local derby.
Yeah, local derby. Sweden won 2-0 in the first leg and 3-1 on aggregate. But there was also a political issue in that Greece were drawn against Albania, with the two countries being at war at the time.
Oh, wow.
So Greece refused to send their players to Albania, and so they were eliminated, and Albania were given a walkover victory. But it makes me wonder, like, if they hadn't, were Albania fine to send their players into Greece?
Yeah.
Or did Greece just?
They just were lucky to get the away leg first.
Yeah. So Albania went through automatically, but they lost to Denmark 4-1 on aggregate in the round of 16. So the 4 teams that made the finals were Denmark, Spain, Hungary, and the Soviet Union. The big shock in the preliminary tournaments were Luxembourg, who had they actually eliminated the Netherlands,
right?
And then they took Denmark to a replay, and that win against the Netherlands was their last win in a Euro qualifier until 1995.
Amazing.
The Northern Ireland took Spain to the wire in the round of 16, only lost 2-1 after having knocked out a strong Poland side in the first preliminary. England drew 1-1 with France in their first preliminary at Hillsborough.
Right.
And then 5 months later, the return leg. 5 months they had to wait for a return leg in Parc de France. The French won 5-2, so it was 6-3 on aggregate, knocking out England.
Yeah.
In their first attempt at the Euros. And then France got beaten by Hungary in the quarterfinals. Denmark knocked out Luxembourg. Spain knocked out Republic of Ireland 7-1 on aggregate. And Soviet Union beat Sweden to get in there. Yeah. So like you said, in 1960, with Spain, so the same as in 1960, the hosts of the finals weren't selected until the semi-finalists were decided. Yeah. So there was obviously the issue that Franco had banned Russia from entering Spain in 1960, but because they were now hosting the tournament, he decided to relax his feelings on it. So he would allow the Soviet Union in to come and play the tournament in Spain, and I think it was probably because it was the tournament, and it turned out to be a really good move from him, because the tournament captured the imagination of the Spanish public, and they really got behind their team. The 4 matches of the tournament were played at the Bernabeu and Camp Nou.
Nice. So what I heard about General Franco was he was quite old in 1964, and he was probably going to be stepping down. And then the success of this tournament was so great, and Spanish public celebrated it so much, he decided to continue, and ended up being in power for another 11 years. And it was the longest dictatorship ever.
Yeah,
General Franco's was, much thanks
just
to
down
the
Euros. So the first match of the finals, so the first semi-final, was Spain versus Hungary.
If you're enjoying the Hand of Pod, follow Sterling Sports for more great football nostalgia content. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can send us a text message. Just click the link in the show notes.
And Spain went ahead, looking like they were going to win, and then Hungary got an equaliser with 6 minutes remaining. So it went to extra time. This is at Bernabeu, and Spain managed to sneak it through 2-1 after extra time. In the other semi-final at Camp Nou, Russia beat Denmark 3-0 with quite an easy game in the end.
Yeah.
So
back-to-back finals for the Russians.
Back-to-back finals for the Russians, and of course it had this added thing of Spain versus Russia.
Yeah.
After Russia having been denied going into Spain, the Spanish team were not a team of superstars. So you mentioned about in 1960 or whatever that they had a couple of non-Spanish players, but that wasn't the case. Those players weren't there anymore. So it was a very team-based squad. They weren't
they had Luis Suarez, didn't they?
Yeah, so Luis Suarez. Yeah, Luis Suarez was their most famous player of the time, and he was their most creative. All of their goals in the tournament kind of came either directly assisted or assisted the assist.
Yeah, from
Luis. So every single goal came from the right side of the pitch and crossing over.
Wow.
So Luis Suarez, he came on. He ended up managing Spain.
Right.
In which World Cup?
The one in Spain, 82? No.
It's not a World Cup that Spain are particularly famous for.
No.
So he managed Spain at World Cup 90.
Italia 90.
And he so in the final, it was another close affair. More than 79,000 people were in the Bernabeu and including Franco himself. Luis Suarez says of himself, it's the best atmosphere he ever played in, with the Spanish support going. Spain took an early lead to go 1-0 up.
Right.
The Soviet Union equalised.
Yeah.
And Spain scored the winner with 6 minutes to go in normal time. So both of their games finished 2-1. The first one in after extra time, second one within 90 minutes. Suarez was Spain's eldest player at 29. So it's a really, really young squad. And the manager, Villalonga, he'd won the European Cup with Real Madrid in 56 and 57. And then he would won the Cup Winners' Cup with Atletico Madrid in 62. So he'd gone from Real to Atletico. I don't know how common that is. It's hard to imagine a manager going from Liverpool to Everton too many times.
Yeah.
But successful in both. And then he wins the European Cup with Spain. But he's not really a household name in Spain. They don't really, because the team didn't. Their win of that European Cup isn't held in. It's not comparable to how England think of the '66 World Cup, even though they didn't win anything for 44 years. And some people suggest that's because they didn't have any kind of big star players to sort of hang on to at the time, because it was very much a team effort. I suppose it's comparable to, in our lifetime, the Greece winning side from more recently, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
Apparently, before the final, Villalonga was laying out his tactics, and he was doing it in sand. So he'd mapped out the pitch on some sand, and he'd put the Spanish players were stones, and the Soviet Union players were pine cones. And he concluded that Spain would win because stones are stronger than pine cones. So it's basically a stone, paper, scissors. That's why they won. Stone, paper, scissors.
Yeah. Sounds like something one of my kids would do.
I've got some interesting facts for you.
Yeah, go. Lovely.
So Luis Suarez became the first player to win the European Cup and the European Championships in the same summer, because he played for Inter Milan, and the following summer they beat Madrid 3-1.
Oh.
So he held on to both.
Yeah.
Ollie Madsen of Denmark scored 11 goals in qualifying, which was a record that stood until very much until the 90s.
Right.
Can you name the player that beats that record, and in what year?
Oh, in the 90s.
Yeah. In qualifying. Yeah.
Was he English?
No.
Okay.
So it was in qualifying for Euro 96.
Okay, for Euro 96. Was it Muller?
No, it was Davosuka.
He
scored 12 goals. So that record stood.
Lobbed Schmeichel at 96, didn't he?
31 years. When Spain won Eurovision in 1968, they became the first country to hold both the Eurovision trophy and the European Cup. Marcelino, who scored the winner in the final 4 days later, then scored the winner for Real Zaragoza to win the Intercities Fairs Cup. 4 days after the final. 4 days after the final.
God, you'd think he'd still be hungover.
Yes, probably was. Yeah, so famous for Spain winning it, but without any superstars, and Russia as the holders being beaten in the final.
Okay, Torbs, tell us about 1968.
Well, I've got I was surprised. So when I was looking back at these tournaments, all I ever really, you only ever sort of see the names of the teams that have won. You don't really sort of know too much about the tournament. So it's only really looking into it a bit more that I realised that it was only a 4-team format. They had a sort of qualifying, as you guys talked about the other years. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. So there's only 4 teams. USSR were the favourites going into it, despite it being in Italy, with Italy there. Nowadays with Italy hosting a tournament, they would be one of the favourites. But USSR, off the back of a couple of previous good tournaments, were the favourites going in. England and Yugoslavia were the other 2 teams. So the USSR, it was there's a couple of random things that happened in this tournament that didn't ever happen again.
Right.
So it was kind of famous for that in the years to come. But it kicked off with what seemed to be quite an attritional game in torrential rain in Naples, with USSR and Italy playing. 4 years before, the USSR were favourites going into the match. Although they had some injuries, and they had beaten Italy in previous 2 tournaments. So, as you talked about, 4 years before in the European tournament, and then also in 1966 at the World Cup. Yeah. So they knocked them out there. And it was actually the USSR, so they had injuries going into the tournament, but they were still favourites. But one of their injuries included the player that knocked them out of the 1966 World Cup. So I think Italy fancied their chances, but it was by all accounts that opening match was a bit of a horrible one. It finished 0-0 after full time. Sorry, after full time, and then also finished 0-0 after extra time. So lots of injuries. Dino Zoff in the Italian goal, who was one of the players of the tournament. He was on top form that game. USSR just before half time had 6 consecutive corners, and Dino Zoff was making saves all over the place. And was a big part of that of it finishing 0-0. So the it then got to after extra time. They didn't, like you said earlier, they didn't have penalties back in these times. So the rule was that it just went down to a coin toss. And even more sort of randomly. So it's not a sort of coin toss in the middle of the pitch, and all the fans and everyone can kind of see what happens. The Facchetti, the Italian captain, USSR captain, and a couple of officials disappear down the tunnel into the changing rooms in a kind of in the depths of the stadium. Do the coin toss. The Italian captain calls tails. It is tails, and so he wins the match. And you've got 70,000 fans kind of just sitting around in the stadium, just sort of waiting.
It's like VAR.
And Facchetti sort of runs out celebrating, and then all the fans realise that they've won, and big celebrations in the stadium. But just an incredible.
Imagine if Italy had lost the coin toss in Italy, and what would have happened in the stadium?
Yeah. Yeah, you would have. Maybe they did it a couple of times till they definitely did win.
Yeah.
God, especially with it being sort of behind closed doors, it also you wouldn't trust it, would you?
You would. You think you picture it happening in the centre circle, don't you?
Yeah.
Like this big ooh.
So I think they realised off the back of that was the first and last time they ever did it, and I think they realised it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the other semi-final, England against Yugoslavia. So England, and this is England off the back of 1966, of course. So
yeah, I would have thought they'd be favourites, not Italy going into it.
Yeah, well, no, it's USSR, not Italy. That was even sort of more unusual, I suppose. So
USSR were favourites.
USSR were favourites, and Italy weren't, despite it being in Italy. Yeah.
Right.
I think England had a bit of a depleted squad, but they still had lots of their big names: Bobby Charlton, Jeff Hurst, Gordon Banks. So they had a solid team. Alan Ball, and they go into the Yugoslavia had a very good team though at that point, and they had a guy called Dragan Zajic, who was nicknamed had several nicknames, I think, but one of them was the Wizard, and Pele said he was the most natural player he had ever seen. He had been playing quite a few years and sort of particular notoriety after the 1960 tournament. Lots of dribbles and sort of unpredictability that sort of took him past players, and scoring goals. So he's a proper creative player, but also with goals in him as well. Anyway, that game, Alan Ball hit the bar, but it was a late goal from Zajic that put Yugoslavia through into the final. England played quite a defensive 4-5-1 formation, so kind of went into it with a kind of not as positive outlook as the Yugoslavian team, who just had a bit more flair and got there in the end on the day.
So I heard that the 1968 tournament was actually potentially the worst ever Euros.
Yeah, you gave me quite a difficult one to review. He said.
Threw you a bit of a dud there.
But this Zajic sounds like the goal he scored against England was particularly good. It's a long ball. He cushions it down, goes past 3 defenders, and then just calmly slots it past Gordon Banks. So yeah, it was. I think it had its moments, the tournament, but yeah, overall, I mean, a 0-0 that's decided after extra time with a coin toss in the rain. It's not off to a flyer, is it? So,
No.
Anyway, so Italy. So it's Italy, Yugoslavia, going into the in the final, and Italy are going into that, the underdogs again, and with Yugoslavia having played
second final for Yugoslavia.
Yeah, and they get off to a decent start. Zajic scores the opener, and so they're 1-0 up. And with 10 minutes to go, Italy equalise with an 80th minute free kick, takes it into extra time, and this time they play extra time. Dino Zoff is making lots of decent saves, and again it finishes a draw. No coin toss this time, but again, this is the first and last time that that it ever goes through to a replay that's played 2 days later.
Blimey.
Italy make 5 changes going into that game, and Yugoslavia had a bit of a depleted and tired squad, and Italy go on to win 2-0 in what seemed to be a pretty unremarkable game. However, the winning goal is particularly the second goal for Italy was a real superb sort of flick up and volley from the edge of the box by Anastasi, who then in the 30th minute or so it's a real proper decent goal to score and win a final. Yeah. But overall the tournament just seemed a bit fairly unremarkable compared to others, but Italy came out on top.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things about that Italy side. Firstly, Dino Zoff was apparently second choice keeper going into the tournament, and he got the first choice keeper got injured, and Dino Zoff basically played every game for Italy for the rest of his career after that. And they were part of the what was known as the Le Grand Inter, which was one of the greatest ever Inter teams. You mentioned Fischetti, the left back, I think he was, and they made up a huge amount of that Italy team, which is why they were such a great side.
Yeah, and they that Inter team we talked about, didn't we, before? They had a lot of solid players, a lot of creative players as well.
I noticed that the 68 thing is the first time there was group qualification for the tournament.
Ah.
Yeah, and the England and that was a home nations one, wasn't it? So it's England, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland. Yeah,
so that group was combining the results of the previous 2 years of the home nations tournament, when everyone else did a home and away group to a quarterfinals to the finals. The format we know much more now. It's funny how you can see it sort of taking shape as it progresses.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was the last tournament where it was this kind of 4-team finals, and the last tournament it was known as the European Nations Cup. So it seems like these first 3 tournaments were very much the introduction to the Euros, and the next Euros, 1972, is where it was the first European Championships, and we'll be talking about that on our next episode. So we'll cover the next 3 tournaments, 72, 76 and 1980.
I remember it well.